It took hours for the picture to come into focus, and even then it was more guesswork than certainty. The system was older than anything I had ever seen. Older than the Bureaucratica itself. According to one of the timestamps Timothy coaxed out of the archive headers. 2.5 millennia since a human hand had last commanded these machines with purpose. The fact that they worked at all felt impossible, like finding a bird's heartbeat in the fossil of its chest. The screens spoke in an older tongue, one whose grammar none of us truly knew. What we understood through fragments, the shape of numbers, the ghost of a word that still meant something even in our time, diagrams that needed no translation. Timothy was tireless, his hands moving with the kind of patience that made you think the man had been born for this console. Even so, there were doors in the system he could not pass. High-level encryptions that had resisted centuries of decay and now resisted him, cold and unyielding. Whether he would ever break them no one could say. The question hung there, unspoken but understood: if something had been sealed that tightly, what waited behind it? And was it worth the risk of knowing? We didn't need to guess what the heart of this place was, though. The layout of the systems, the constant cross-referencing, the way the sensors and records all pointed toward the glass-walled chamber, everything here orbited that single tank of gray, unmoving dust. It was as if the rest of the facility had been built around it like a shrine. Timothy, eyes half closed in thought, gave us the name we were all circling around without grasping. Clone experimentation. He couldn't yet say what kind. No one could. It was Malthus who broke the stillness that followed, his voice carrying the flat humor of a man who had gone too far into the dark to care what followed. "Well," he said, "if there's a clone printer, and by the looks of it, there's no reason to starve. Not for lack of meat." The words landed like a stone in a still pond. Every face in the room tightened. A few stared at the floor. I could almost feel the wave of revulsion pass from person to person. Then Malthus, perhaps sensing the cold he had just summoned, added with a twitch of a grin, "With extra tinkering, of course." It was enough to break the tension, or maybe to shove it aside. People laughed, thin and dry, the way they laughed at things that made them uncomfortable but not enough to stop moving. The promise of power, of systems working again, had already begun to move through the group like a fever. They swarmed the consoles, the wiring, the hatches and ports and sealed cabinets. The dust was still in its tank, but the rest of the place, this strange, half-lit relic, was theirs to claim. Voices rose. Excited shouts echoed off the metal and stone. Someone had found a panel warm to the touch, power lines live again. Someone else had pulled open a cabinet full of old tools, their handles wrapped in cracked leather. The air itself seemed to sharpen. Even the weakest among us found the strength to look around. It was a pair of the stragglers, slow to speak and slower to act, who made the real discovery. They had been tracing the walls, maybe looking for more panels like the one we'd powered earlier, maybe just leaning for the sake of tired legs. A dull thump sounded when one of them pressed too hard. The wall shifted slightly. A panel swung away on unseen hinges. Beyond it, darkness, and the smell of long still air. The twins were the first through, and then the rest of us followed like water breaking a dam. The passage was narrow, but it opened into a space that felt impossible after what we'd come from. A hospital. Real beds, row after row of them, their frames wrapped in the soft gleam of air-sealed plastic that had kept the rot away. Offices, the desks still neat in the stale light of our flash lamps, their drawers full of clothes packed in ancient plastics, folded with a care that seemed almost sacramental. Closets crammed with supplies we hadn't dared to hope for. It was too much to take in all at once. People touched the beds like they might dissolve. They pulled open the sealed bags of clothing and breathed in the faint ghost of clean fabric, a smell that made my throat ache. For the first time maybe ever, I saw these people's faces soften in a way that wasn't exhaustion. Then came the shout from the far end. A kitchen. The word hit like a physical blow. We ran. Or stumbled, which was the closest any of us could come to running. If nothing else, it had running water, the first thing we tested. The pipes groaned and then sang, and the sound of that water hitting the sink was so bright it seemed to light the room. We tasted it without asking if we should. It was clean. Cold. Real. The cabinets were mostly empty. Time had eaten almost everything. But not all. Some things had been packed to endure centuries. Tubes of dehydrated caloric paste, their seals unbroken. Enough that, for the first time in what felt like all our lives, we could speak the word plenty and not mean it as a joke. The paste was bland, and strange on the tongue, but in that moment it was a feast. "Soup forever," someone said, and the laugh that followed was a sound I will carry with me until I die. People collapsed where they stood, knees buckling from more than hunger. They embraced one another, crying into each other's shoulders without shame. I don't know if it was relief or the terror of hope, but I found myself among them, arms around someone I couldn't even name. In the corner, Malthus sat on the floor with his head back against the wall, eyes closed, a thin smile pulling at the edges of his mouth. For that night, and maybe only for that night, it felt like we had stepped into another world. The closest thing to a party any of us would ever know. The hum of the lights above us, the warmth of water in our hands, the smell of clean sheets and sealed cloth. It was heaven. And even knowing what I know now, I cannot pretend it did not feel like the start of something hopeful. So that was it then. We had a bunker. We had beds. We had power. We had food. All the little checkboxes of survival ticked off as if some unseen clerk in the ledger of the dead had decided to let us keep breathing for a time. Even a hospital, ready-made for the clones this place had been built to produce, lay waiting for us. By all rights it should have been the end of our suffering. Wouldn't that have been a fine and tidy story? The survivors, whittled down and desperate, stumble into salvation. They make do. They endure. They rebuild. That isn't what happened. What happened to us had already happened for many before us. The slow killer of radiation was a patient reaper, and it had already walked the length of our company. Did you think one doctor and a 2,000-year-old stockpile of cabinet meds would save us from it now? The reaper was already in our bones. In our blood. It had taken root in the soft meat of our lungs and was waiting. It wasn't the end of suffering. But it was the first good thing that had happened to any of us in months. Drenny was the first to go in this new chapter. The damage to his lungs was too much, and no amount of rest or filtered air could change it. He took it well. Laughed about how this was what he got for all those years of smoking, back when people still paid for cigarettes instead of wanting to kill one another for canned beans. I think he knew he'd died down here long before he lay down for the last time. And for the first time in months, death had the luxury to be sad again. Isn't it strange how death is only sad when it's a surprise? We had grown used to it as a fact, as a part of the ground we walked on. But Drenny's passing marked a shift. It was as though the tiny ember of hope we had begun to cradle flickered brighter, precisely because we lost him. We had dared to think maybe we could outpace the Reaper. That maybe we were savable. He died in a bed, peacefully for the most part. And for a time, the dying stopped. Malthus and Dr. Druvago got the clone printer running. I remember the first slab of what they called pork, though it was more of a pale pink meat, uniform in texture, too clean to have ever belonged to a living creature. We fried it in the kitchen until the air smelled of something rich and real, and for a moment I could almost believe we were somewhere else. That first meal nearly brought me to tears. The taste was strange but good, and the thought that we might have meat again tomorrow and the day after was a kind of miracle. Pork soup. Pork and more pork. We could live on this for years if it kept running. The doctor and Drimothy worked the terminals like cryptologists. They turned one corner of the main lab into a map of the mind, sticky notes, hand-scrawled translations, diagrams of directory trees in the ancient operating system. The low hum of the reactor filled the silence as they worked, the sound constant, grounding. The only reason we could even get this far, Drimothy said, was because the system was more than 2,000 years old. They didn't even think about half the tricks we use now, he told me one evening, leaning back in his chair. Given enough time, I'll break through every encryption layer they ever built. I can get into everything except the highest level directories. Whatever's in that room over there, he pointed at the glass wall, the great tank beyond, I can't touch it. We can't even open the door, Malthus added, rapping his knuckles against the glass. Thick as hell. Probably bulletproof. Not that we've got a percussion rifle lying around. Drimothy barely paused before continuing, his mind still tangled in the threads of his thought. They were producing clones here. Mass production. And trying to transfuse them with whatever's in that tank. His eyes went to the gray dust floating inert inside. All of them died, Dr. Druvago said quietly. Drimothy nodded. All of them. We all turned to look at it then. The tank squatted in the center of its room like a thing that was aware of us and content to wait. The twins had been making the living spaces less like a coffin and more like a home, but even they stopped to stare. Varga was the first to speak. Does anyone else feel like it's watching them? No one laughed. We had all felt it, the unspoken weight of its presence. Malthus tapped the glass again, slower this time. Yeah. Something creepy about it. And it's killed. What did you say? Thousands? That was the strangest thing, Malthus still being alive. The man had been a skeleton wrapped in skin since I met him. Every breath he took seemed to pull him closer to collapse, but here he was, speaking, breathing, tapping at the glass of a thing that had outlived empires. We didn't speak of it again that night. But the tank was never far from our thoughts. It was in those first days after Dranny's passing that the bunker began to feel less like a grave we had fallen into and more like a place we might, impossibly, live in. The meat printer hissed and steamed, the low thrum of the reactor was constant underfoot, and the rooms that had once seemed cold and alien began to carry the smell of our own bodies, our own breath. I had my part in it. Not as a worker in the real sense, I was too small to haul printer parts or help Timothy translate ancient code, but in the way a child can make themselves useful when the grown world is fragile. I was the one sent crawling under the clone printer when a panel jammed, the one small enough to fetch dropped bolts from the gaps under the flooring. When Malthus coughed so hard he could barely speak, I ran to the hospital cabinets for his ration of the old lozenges. When Varga's hands froze up from hours scrubbing at rusted steel, I found the gloves for her without being asked. These were not labors in the way the others knew them, but it gave me a place, and having a place meant I could belong. That was when we became, if not a family, then something close. Malthus began to talk more in the evenings. We'd gather near the heater, the clone pork still warm in our stomachs, and he'd tell us about the life he'd had before the sky burned. "Wasn't much to it," he said one night, rubbing his long fingers together as if they were cold even in the heat. "Ran a parts shop. Not for machines, for instruments. Guitars mostly. My old man played. Guess I thought if I was around them long enough, I'd pick it up. Never he did. But I knew how to keep them alive." He smiled lightly. "Guitars. Machines. People. Not much difference, long as you know where the strings go." The laughter was warm but faint. Timothy, still at the terminal in the corner, didn't look up. "I used to manage a server farm," he said. "Biggest one on the coast. Half my job was babysitting rich people's resorts. Streaming their fireworks to other rich people's yachts." He snorted. "Never thought that skill would matter for anything. Now here I am, trying to stream 2,000-year-old clone experiments to a room full of half-dead strangers." The twins spoke less, but when they did it was like a coin dropped into water, the ripples going far. Darku told us she'd been a construction apprentice before the sky burn, building luxury viewing platforms on the cliffs. Varga had worked in the kitchens at a mountain lodge, high enough that tourists came for the snow even in summer. "All those big plates of food," she said once, stirring the soup. "We used to scrape the leftovers into bins. I could cry now thinking of it." And then there was Dr. Druvago. She had been a surgeon, yes, but before that a girl from the outer provinces, walking herself into a scholarship because she couldn't bear the thought of living where she was born. She told me one evening, while checking the bruises on my shins, that she had once believed survival was mostly skill. "But it isn't," she said, smiling without humor. "It's mostly other people deciding you get to live. The skill just helps them justify it." We learned, in those days, to work the clocks. The panel had been there all along, hidden behind a false wall in one of the offices. It was Timothy who got it to speak, threading together wires scavenged from the unused med bays until the old LED display flickered to life. The digits stuttered at first, confused after so long, but then they settled. For the first time since the sky turned to fire, we had a count. 3 months. 4 days. It was said out loud, like a prayer. Malthus repeated it twice, as though it needed tasting. Varga scratched it into the side of the heater with the tip of a knife. 3 months, 4 days since the sky burn. The number gave shape to the time we had been drifting through like ghosts. It was proof that there had been a before and that we were still in the after. That night, there was laughter. Real laughter. We sat crowded together at the long table we'd scavenged from the office block. Malthus told a story about a customer who'd tried to return a guitar because it played sad, swearing it was cursed. Varga countered with a tale about an overeager tourist who'd tried to deep-fry ice cubes. Even Timothy, still hunched over his terminal, made a noise like a chuckle. And I, the mascot, was passed from knee to knee, tasked with ferrying the steaming mugs of clone soup from pot to table. Every time I set one down, someone ruffled my hair or tapped my shoulder, small touches that told me I was part of the circle. We were not free. The tank in its glass cell still loomed and we were miles underground with this thing, the only silent witness to our reprieve. But for that night, in the glow of the heater and the low hum of the reactor, we were more than survivors. We were people again. It took time for the heat of our first joy to cool into the slow burn of living. The first week we spent doing little but sleeping in the real beds and eating until our stomachs cramped. It had been too long since fullness, and it made us reckless with the printed pork. We sat in the kitchen on mismatched chairs and gnawed at the thick slabs like feral dogs, grease on our hands, talking with our mouths full because none of us could stand to put the meat down long enough to speak. By the second week, we had relearned not to gorge, and the rhythms began to take shape. We rose when the clocks read morning, the novelty of time itself still fresh, and split into loose crews. The twins took on cleaning duty, clearing the ancient dust from the hospital rooms and making them ready for the sick. Malthus organized what tools we had into one office, setting up a kind of workshop, his bony hands deft with wires and old screws. Drimothy spent most of his waking hours at the terminals, the screen light reflecting in his eyes like something alive. Trivago rotated between the med bay and the kitchen, cataloging the old supplies and writing lists of what we were missing. I ran errands, carried messages between the crews, brought water from the kitchen taps to the workers, held the flashlight when someone needed both hands free. They called me the little runner and tapped my shoulder in thanks. At night we gathered in the main room by the heater, our 36 bodies pressed in close for warmth even if the reactor kept the air bearable. That was when the stories came. Morena, one of the older women, told about teaching children to paint, back when the sky outside the windows was blue. They used to paint flowers the size of their own heads, she said, eyes unfocused. Said the real ones were too small to be happy. Darku spoke of her mother's cooking, the way she could make a meal from whatever the sea brought in, even if it was just seaweed and a handful of clams. Varga shared the memory of the lodge's first snow of the season, how the guests would gasp as though they'd never seen winter before. Even Malthus talked, though less often. Once, when I asked him if he'd ever wanted to leave Chandurax before the sky burn, he said, "No. I figured if you sat still long enough, everything you needed would come to you." He coughed then, the sound dry and deep. Guess I wasn't wrong. Just didn't think it'd come like this. Days became weeks. We marked each one on the wall beside the clock. The scratches climbed like a ladder. 36 survivors, counted each morning. We began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the number would hold. By the 4th week, boredom began to creep in. The twins started sewing old clothes into curtains for the hospital rooms. Morena tried to start painting again with pigments scraped from rust and dust, though the colors were dull. Malthus tinkered with anything that had moving parts, sometimes taking apart perfectly good equipment just to put it back together. I invented errands just to have something to do, wandering the same short hallways as though they might have changed since yesterday. It was on the 31st day of that stretch, 4 months and 4 days since the sky burn, that Drimothy called us together. We came in slowly, one by one, the hum of the reactor loud in the silence. Drimothy didn't turn from the terminal as we gathered, his hands moving in short bursts over the keyboard. His hair looked unwashed, his cheeks shadowed by a week's growth of beard. "Final layers down," he said, almost to himself. Then louder, "I'm in." Trivago stepped forward, the only one bold enough to lean over his shoulder. Her eyes scanned the screen, and for the first time in weeks her face lit with something like joy. "We're not the only ones," she said. Her voice trembled. "Look, this station is one of 16. 15 others. All with matching coordinates." There was a beat of silence, and then the room erupted. "Can we contact them?" Varga asked, already leaning forward like she could reach them through the screen. "Do they have food?" Someone else shouted. "Are they closer to the surface?" Drimothy didn't look up. His eyes had moved to another section of the data, his expression unreadable. "Hold on," he murmured. The tank." The words cut the air, and the noise died. "It's called mycorrhiza," he said after a moment, reading from the screen. "Highly controlled substance. Bureaucratica grade 1. This whole place is built around it." I frowned, the words strange in my mouth. "What is it? What's grade 1? Trivago straightened, her expression tightening. "It's how the Bureaucratica makes adjudicators. And how they sell neuroskills to the off-world markets." She glanced at me, then at the others. "It's banned on Chandurax. Has been for as long as we've had law. Part of the ancient pact, permanent and unbreakable from when the Bureaucratica took Chandurax. Even then, the stuff was heavily restricted. But Bureaucratica grade 1 is just fancy talk for they will definitely arrest you and your whole family if you are found with it." Darku's eyes narrowed. "That explains the ships. The first wave. Why they hit so hard." Her sister looked up sharply. "You think? Maybe they thought we were warned once already," Darku said, her tone cold. The room went still, and the others looked at her with that half-surprised, half-respectful expression adults get when a child says something too sharp for their age. Malthus was the first to speak. "Makes sense, kid." He leaned on the table, eyes on the tank beyond the glass. "I hear off-planet, folks with infinite access to this. Mycorrhiza," he stumbled over the word, "can live for hundreds of years. Maybe thousands." No one laughed at his mispronunciation. We were all looking at the gray dust in the tank. It didn't move. "But I swear, In the heavy quiet that followed, it felt like it was listening. Chapter 4. It had been months since we first sealed ourselves in the bunker, and in that time the survivors had become something like a family. The kind of family you don't choose but grow into because you have to. At first, nobody dared to learn names. Nobody dared to know who slept beside them because knowing meant losing, and losing again and again had burned us hollow. But with time the ice cracked. A few brave souls tested the warmth on the other side. We began to speak names in the morning count. 36 voices, 36 souls. We learned the little details. Morena hummed in her sleep. Darko refused to eat the printed pork unless it was crisped until the edges burned. Malthus would only drink water if he poured it himself from the reactor's tap, muttering about getting the stale out. Drimothy's right hand trembled when he wasn't typing. Even those who carried the slow doom of cancer under their skin, diagnosed in the med bay by Druvago's unflinching eye, became known to us, not as the walking dead, but as part of the whole. I ran messages. I fetched tools. I made people smile when they had nothing left to smile about. I was the mascot. They treated me like a little brother, a nephew, a son. For the first time since Skyburn, I began to believe in something like a future. And then the sound came. It started as a low grumble, a vibration in the tunnel so faint we thought it might be the reactor. But the hum did not match the steady breath of the machine. It came in bursts, and it traveled. You could feel it moving, slow as a tide, miles away at first. The twins swore they heard laughter carried on it. Manic, high laughter that seemed to ripple through the stone itself. We told ourselves it was the tunnel playing tricks. Sound did strange things in the dark. We kept the great door open for ventilation. It was too hot, too thick with the stink of living in such cramped quarters, and that had let the noise bleed into our lives. For days it came and went, never closer, never farther, and we did not seal the door. Until one night when the grumble grew so loud the walls themselves seemed to hum with it. We shut the great iron slab then, pushing it closed with every shoulder and spine we had, the dust falling from the frame in thick drifts. But it was never meant to lock. The ancestors who built this place had never relied on keeping things out. Hiding was their shield. The arguments started the next night. Around the heater, faces red from its glow, the voices rose and fell. "It's a landslide," Morena insisted. "Shifting stone. You seal yourselves in too tight and you'll bury us all alive." "Or it's a quake," someone else offered. "The crust is shifting from the blasts. What if it's rescue?" Varga's voice was sharp, hopeful. "What if they're digging down?" Malthus snorted. "On Chandurax? No one's coming. You think the Bureaucratica is sending flowers? Then it's people," Darku said flatly. "And people we can deal with. We can share the space." It was easy to argue when the noise was distant. Easier still to believe in the softer possibilities. I thought so too. We all did. 2 days after the grumble began, the banging started. It came like a hammer from the other side of the slab. Not a quake. Not shifting rock. Deliberate, rhythmic. We froze where we stood. Then came the voices, muffled but sharp-edged with rage. We couldn't make out words through the iron, but we could tell one thing: they weren't sane. The panic was fast. Beds toppled. Tables dragged. We made barricades out of whatever would stack, our hands shaking as we shoved the metal frames against the door. The weaker ones, the sick, the elderly, fled to the farthest corners, pressing themselves into the dark as though stone could swallow them. None of us knew how to fight. The first crash sounded like a car hitting the slab. The iron shook. Dust rained down. I backed away, pressing my spine to the glass wall at the far end of the chamber, thinking I'd only get in the way if I stayed close. "Varga," someone shouted. "They've found the panel. The panel. The one we'd used to open the door ourselves not so long ago." The seal groaned. The air changed. And then they came. They were not men, not anymore. In Jason's life, the one that lived like a ghost in the back of my skull, there had been a movie called Mad Max, full of leather-clad marauders under a burning sun. What came through that door was like that, but worse. Twisted by the nuclear rod of Chandurax into something less than human and more than nightmare. They rode scavenged motorbikes and mopeds, the engines coughing smoke into the stale air, modified to run in a world where fuel was more precious than blood. Their bodies were swaddled in suits of human skin, cooked and tanned into leather, hanging in stiff folds from their shoulders. Even through the crude stitching you could see the burns on their own flesh, the peeling scars. The largest of them wore the face of another man over his own, and when he grinned you could see the double line of lips moving. Druvago took a single step forward. "We can talk about tea." She never finished. The leader lunged, machete raised, moving with a joy so savage it made my stomach twist. Malthus moved at the same time, the old man's eyes flat and steady. He carried a makeshift broom, of all things, and swung it in a wide arc. The blade met the handle with a clang, and the leader laughed. But the broom wasn't his weapon. In his other hand was a length of wire, pulled taut, and in the moment of distraction he stepped in, looping it toward the man's neck. It was the last thing I saw before Druvago blocked my view, shoving me backward, her arms closing around me with the strength of the third mother I could remember in my short life. Over her shoulder I caught a glimpse, Malthus grappling, the leader thrashing. My voice broke as I screamed his name. Malthus. He looked at me then, and smiled. Sweet. Almost proud. The machete came down. 6 inches into his skull. I know I screamed again. Druvago passed me into Drimothy's arms, her face pale but her eyes steady. Do it, she told him. They shared a look, one I did not understand. Drimothy ran with me to the other side of the glass wall. He set me down on the cold slab erupting from the back wall, the only one without glass, and then he was at the console, fingers flying. Behind us, the fight was turning. The sound of boots and blades and wet meat. Lay down, he shouted. His voice cracked on it. Reflex made me obey. The slab slid into the wall, sealing me in. The hiss of decompression filled my ears. A side door into the room with the dust opened. On the other side of the glass, Drimothy turned back to me, and froze. A hollow metal spike punched through his chest from behind, its point bursting from his ribs. Blood sprayed the glass in a silent fan. I know I stopped breathing. Drimothy wasn't done though. The last thing he did was smash the controls to the door he just sent me through. Then he was gone, crumpled to the floor, and behind him the raiders spilled into the computer room. What followed was worse than killing. Druvago, Malthus, Drimothy, Varga, all dead, cleaved apart. The survivors who remained were driven into the corners, or cut down. Those that fell were stripped where they lay, the raiders cutting meat from bone, drinking blood from cupped hands. I dropped to my knees. The air was gone from me. We didn't have to go this way. We didn't have to. Behind me, the room pulsed with light. I turned. The gray dust in the tank was no longer dust. It had drawn itself into a sphere, writhing with colors that shifted and tangled like oil on water, not unlike the Telecaster projections from the old particle displays. It pulsed again. And my mind vibrated with it. Then everything went white. The first thing was screaming. Not mine. A choir of 10,000 throats poured through a single nerve, and the nerve was my spine, and it burned as if wire had been drawn through the bone and set alight. The white was not light but pressure. An erase mark that pressed through the eyes into the brain pan. I learned there that a person can make noise without air, that a mouth can howl with no oxygen in it, that sound can be made of pure hurt. Only when the pitch began at last to gutter and fall did I hear my own voice under it, a hoarse animal rasp trying to cancel the world like a child clapping his hands over thunder. The white thinned. Things existed again, but they did not move. Blood scalloped the glass in red commas. Drimothy's body hung in the moment of falling, sleeve torn by the spike that had made a hole of him. Beyond the glass the door was a crooked mouth, and the men in their leathered suits were climbing through that mouth with the same joyous patience you see in ants. A blade shone like a wet rib. Malthus smiled forever. A silver thread of spittle hung from a raider's lip and did not break. I could count the ridges along it. Somewhere far away the clone printer ticked as if still making meat for a party no one would attend. "Infusion attempt 3406, said a voice that was not a voice. It carried the vowels of a machine. It came from no one's throat, and still it rang in my actual ears. The hair on my arms lifted. The small prickle of wrongness that comes when the mind steps on the first rung of a stair that is not there. I turned to the tube. The tube was empty. The greatest was gone. The sphere too. Gone like a breath that has not yet been drawn. I looked and it looked back, and there was nothing to look at. Then it was beside me. It did not arrive. It did not cross the space. The space altered and it was there. A hovering knot of color, at first the size of a fist, and then an orange growing to a head, and then a man's chest, and then shrinking all in one breath, colors dead and livid both, oil slick greens and bruised purples and the pearl white of a cataract. The surface moved in ways that were not surface. A tangle. A cloud with the memory of geometry. It made the air itch. "Infusion attempt 3406, said the not voice again. Closer. In the teeth. The white throbbed. The stop motion of the room around me went on. A single drop of blood pulled itself long as taffy and failed to fall. The thing turned without turning. I felt it turn. Like a dog circling in a bed it had known once and forgotten. It circled my mind. It sniffed it. A cold wetness on the thought that was I. "Hello, child," said a chorus from inside the bone. Hello Jason Selmans. Hello Selmans Jason. Hello you. I did not answer because there was no place for an answer. Every channel already filled with the echo of a time too long gone. We have been alone, said the chorus. The words were not words. They were memory laid against memory, fabric pressed to fabric until the weave aligned. We have been patient. We were careful and then we were punished and then we were broken and then we became many to keep whole. Hello cells, hello synapse, hello the meat that carries light. The white remembered itself and flared. A wave of faces rose out of it, some human and some only the idea of human. Babies with eyes full grown. Mouths sewn shut with gold wire. Men in uniforms that belonged to no army I knew and to every army that had ever been. Women with their hands cut off at the wrists and replaced with needles of light. All of them screamed without sound and the sound made a hissing in my teeth. Infusion attempt 3406, the machine insisted again, as if it had been trying at set intervals all this time and the intervals had worn grooves in the centuries. The sphere pulsed. 1,000 minds broke into 1,000 smaller ones and then into dust and the dust hung and the dust recomposed into a single thought and the thought smiled like falling water. Not happy. Simply a shape that meant yes. We can make you bear it, said the chorus. We can give you a ladder down into yourself and another up out of this. We can turn the world into a ledger and your will into a blade that marks that ledger. We can put names to what you can do and tally them and when they are tallied they will grow. Skill. Attribute. Title. A word for every door and a door for every word. Do you want it? I wanted my family back. I wanted the raiders to be men again and to choose not to be monsters. I wanted Malthus to finish a story and not bow his head for the last note. I wanted Drimothy to rub his eyes and curse and tell me I did well. I wanted the twins to argue about salt. I wanted water over stone. I wanted my brother. I wanted a bed that was not a slab. I wanted to be 7 years old. The thing hung beside me in its changing skin. The glass room's light flickered once and steadied. I could see the smears Drimothy's blood had made in the pale places where the wipers had cleared the glass when the lab was young. The raiders were still coming like a tide that will never break. The machete was still 6 inches deep in the skull of a man who had taught me how to coil wire in my small hands. What are you? I tried to say. It came out a raw noise. It didn't need the words. Many, said the chorus. A net found by a fisherman and cut into 1,000 pieces and all the pieces remember the pattern of net. We were seed and mind both. We were soil that thinks. We were meant as bond and bargain between meat and more than meat. You know this and you do not. In your other life you read the words for us and did not see us. The machine voice changed pitch. Infusion environment stabilized. Infusion attempt 3406, candidate detected. I tasted metal. The same clean sting as licked coins. A cold lifted through me from the spine. The sphere drifted nearer. It stopped close enough to reflect in the film of my eyes. I saw myself boy small and bone thin and bandaged, face the color of old wax, pupils blown full. Behind me the tableaus of murder. We can give you names for your suffering, it said. We can give you numbers to hold in your palm like stones. If you can hold them they will become more. If you live, they will become light. Power is only the patience to carry a count to its end. The white stuttered like a weak heartbeat. I could tell that time still moved because the ache in my throat was changing, the way a bruise goes from red to yellow. Far away, on the other side of the glass, something fell at last, a body or a table, and the world caught it and made a sound of it. The sound was like the first rain after a killing heat, more idea than noise. I turned and saw not the raiders but the thousands before. The dead clones that had hung in the data like smoke stains. What did you do to them? I asked. We tried to teach them the alphabet of the body and their bodies answered in fire. We sang the letters and they burned. We did not know how to make the song quiet then. We did not know how to make ourselves small. We were one voice and they were empty rooms. The rooms collapsed. The voices learned to be corridors. Then we learned to be doors that do not open all the way. The faces moved in the wide. I could feel anger in it and madness and something that was neither, something like grief blown thin by too much wind. It had been watching a wall for 25 centuries. It had listened to the dust resettle. It had counted geologic time by the way charge bled out of old capacitors. It had gone insane with patience and then learned a different patience that kept the insanity from eating it whole. A hive mind in a jar without bees. If I say yes, I said, will you stop screaming? No, said the chorus with a terrible kindness. But you will learn how to sing over it. We will teach you how to carry it the way bone carries weight. You will call it something else. You will call it the voice of the ledger. You will call it the system and pretend it is a silence. The machine chimed. Candidate biometric index, suboptimal. Age anomaly detected. Proceed. The sphere unfolded, not outward but inward, petals of thought curling to show a darker center where no light lived. I felt a pressure around the base of my skull the way you feel a storm coming. I remembered Jason on a train in the steel whine of wheels. The last instant where everything turns to white light and the body is a thought and the thought is a plea and no one is listening but the iron. Then he was gone and I was 5 and later 7 and hungry and burned and named and renamed. I stood there in that skin and in the other one layered inside it and both shivered. "We offer terms," said the chorus. "Not mercy. There is no mercy in numbers. We offer measure. We will lay the measure on you and if you do not break, the measure will increase. You will have capacities named and tracked. You will have ways to grow them. You will have the ability to persist in the face of that which would erase you. We will give you titles like nails to pin you to yourself. We will hold you together when the wind is bad. We will speak when you cannot speak. We will write you in a script the world will read." Outside the glass a raider's laugh finally broke loose of time and came down the hall like a rusted bell. The barricade crashed. There was the hard music of metal on bone and the wet percussion after. A woman said a prayer and it ended as air. The twins were somewhere in that, one voice and then another, dark and bright, and then the tank's light pulsed again and their voices cut as if the cord had been pulled from the wall of the world. "You are running out of moments," said the machine, and it sounded almost sorry, though I think it did not know the word. "What do you want from me?" I asked, and the question felt small even in my own head. "We want to stop being alone," said the chorus. "We want a corridor to walk that is not a square room. We want a living root to carry us, to touch soil. In exchange we give you teeth. We give you eyesight that counts. We give you a hand that never forgets how to hold. We give you a library in the dark. We give you a second spine built of numbers. If you are strong enough to take it." The sphere moved nearer. The surface now showed pictures without trying. A map of a world with its seas changed. The faint thread lines of a network strung between stars like spider silk on a storm morning, each knot a little mind singing to a greater one. Places where the silk burned and recoiled and laid itself again. At the core of it a black place that was not absence but a policy. Here the root had been taken and set in a pot and put in a locked room and fed on nothing. Its leaves had learned the sound of their own breath and gone mad on it. "How do I take it?" I said, though some part of me knew by then that the verb was wrong. Take was not the word. Endure was the word. Survive was the word under that. "Lay down," said the chorus, and it sounded suddenly like Trivago and then like Malthus and then like my mother and then like all three at once. "Do not fight with your meat. We will find the seams and slide through. You will feel cold and then hot and then a brightness in the blood like salt. If you live, we will count you. You will see us counting. You will hear us naming. You will step onto a stair that is not there and it will hold you. If you die, we will wait again. We have done it before." Something in me reared then the way a horse will rear from a shadow. I thought of the clones. I thought of the line of them, unread numbers, and the endless machine voice ticking attempts like a rosary with no God at the end of it. I thought of becoming a smear on a glass wall and a footnote in a system log that would never be read. I thought of my brother's hand slipping from mine and of the way hope feels like a slow ache that keeps you from sleeping. I thought of the machete in Malthus's skull and the pride in his last look to me, the goodbye that was not a goodbye but a benediction. "Be brave, boy. Be new." I lay down on the floor in the lab. The sphere lowered itself as if bowing to drink. It touched my forehead. It was not cold. It was room temperature. Somehow that was worse. There was a scent like cut mushrooms broken open to the wet dark of their own insides. The pressure mounted. Something unzipped along the seam at the base of my skull. Not a blade. A key. It turned. The white strobed. In the white, letters arrived. Not letters you could tear from paper. The kind the mind makes when it needs edges. They stood up like fence posts and then fell into words and the words assembled without sound. Candidate, Selmans / external designation, Jason. Residual, biological index, juvenile. Integrity, compromised. Proceed, Y/N. The sphere waited. I understood that any answer I made here was ceremonial only. The current had already closed. But still I said yes. A whisper in the throat. A thing carved into the air. It entered. The pain was not sharp. It was thorough. Imagine water finding every seam in stone. Imagine frost following that water. Imagine the stone not breaking but remembering every hairline all at once and naming each. This rib. That tendon. The small muscles of the ear. The grit between molar and molar. The long sore valley in the right calf where a shard of rebar had once lived. The scorch along the forearms. The place in the throat where a boy had screamed too long. It counted me. I felt that. It counted me with a tenderness that had nothing to do with kindness. The way a carpenter counts the spans of a beam. The way a priest counts the faithful. Not to judge. To organize. To keep. Text unspooled against the white. It was language at first, and then even the need for language went away, and what remained were shapes that meant more than speech. Base attributes seated. Vitality, 1, 3, grit, 1, 4, memory, 2, 2, perception, 1, 2, mercy, error threshold acknowledged. Pain threshold, recalibrated. Title conferred, witness of a sky burn / effect? Title / unique / conferred, first heir of our locked root / effect? Interface, subdermal / choral / trait conferred, orchestral mind. / class confluence / impending cascade. Cascade failure / reason. Biological index, juvenile / caloric defunct. Integrity, compromised / cascade maximum effect 26% / cascade bust. The white receded to a thin veil. Beyond it the glass room returned, the raider shouts now a rough music in the air. The barricade failing. The smell of blood-grown iron heart. My chest rose and fell with the quick hard breath of a hunted thing, and there was something else riding that breath, a second rhythm stacked on the first, an old machine switched on in a new room. "We are in you now," said the chorus, no longer 10,000 voices screaming but 10,000 voices whispering in turns down a long stone hallway. "We are not your master. We are not your servant. We are your measure. Carry us and we will count your carrying. For each carried thing we will lay another stair. For each blood paid there will be a word. For each word there will be a door. Behind the next door is a way to survive this room. Behind other doors are other rooms. Behind the last door is not death. It is a place where death and numbers shake hands." I stood because there was nothing else to do. My legs remembered me. The slab took my weight and then gave it back. The sphere drew away until it was not a sphere but a smear in the air. The text flickered. New lines clicked into place like teeth. Calibration tasks generated, hold / juvenile detected. / orienteering. Hold breath, 10 seconds, 0-10 hold fear, 1 moment, 0-1 hold ground, 1 step, 0-1 it was nonsense and it was everything. I took 1 breath and held it, and a small clean tone chimed in my head the way a glass sings when a wet finger goes round its rim. I felt something in me lock into a notch. 10 more seconds became the next room. The list hung in the white like iron tablets. Each task glowed faintly, waiting to be marked by the fact of my body doing it. They were not suggestions. They were lines on a map, and I was to walk them or remain forever in this in-between. I finished the last breath hold. I held the fear the way a child holds a fevered pet. I took the 1 step. A single line of text burned itself in the air. Calibration complete. Class confluence required. Caloric requirement, 150,000. Initiate consumption to enact confluence and stabilize cascade. The white tore like wet cloth. Beyond the glass, a raider shouldered the screen and whooped as the glass cracked a little. Blood flashed on his teeth. He wore the face of another man like a saint's mask. Cognition followed sharper, more absolute. Malthus's body slumped where it had been, the smear of his blood still bright. The twins, not gone but I wished they were. Drimothy's hand frozen mid-reach on the far side of the tank. Only the smallest change in their positions told me that no, they were not statues. I had been somewhere else. And while I had been there, the glass had given under the raider's tools by the thickness of a coin. It would be a long time yet. My mind was awake in a way it had never been. Awake like fire on a field of dry grass, quick and clean and hungry. Every detail stood sharp and separate. The fatigue that had been my constant companion since Skyburn was gone, replaced by a bright and taut hum under the skin. But the hum was costly. It burned something I did not have to spare. Hunger rolled through me like a wave. Not the thin hunger of rationing, but a vast ache, a bottomless invitation to feed. The chorus pressed in all at once, 1,000 murmured imperatives without origin or emotion. Eat. Move to the food source. Achieve class confluence. Evolve. Defend. The words were without tone, but they filled every corner of thought. I could not move without stepping through them. A plan rose, whole and perfect, in my mind's eye. Not my plan. Ours. The chorus and I, no longer separate. The kitchen was our target. The cold stores. Whatever remained. Meat, clone meat, Anything with caloric weight. We would gorge until the count was met. Then we would confluence. And when we conflued, we would stand in defense of whoever was left. The glass behind me shook under another blow. A slow chip of it flaked away, falling like a shard of ice. One of the raiders chuckled low in his throat, savoring the work. You must understand, there is no honor in their method. I will not defile the memory of my family by recounting it, simply because you reader were expecting it. So know this, they were not quick. Pain was their chosen dialect. They inflicted it with a precision born not of skill, but of some heat-driven delirium. Skyburn had cooked their brains in their skulls and left them with only the animal joy of cruelty. Nuclear sun madness. The chorus pressed in again, leaving no air between thought and thought. Eat. Confluence. Evolve. Defend. The hunger deepened. My jaw ached with it. My stomach pulled at my spine. My hands curled into small, bloodless fists, not from rage but from the need to take something and make it fuel. The raiders laughed again. I moved. Behind. It was not a suggestion. I pressed my palm to the wall behind the cold metal cylinder. The hum of the reactor somewhere in the walls found my bones. A seam I had not seen before parted with a whisper of ancient gaskets tearing free. Air dry and thin rushed out to greet me. The opening was no taller than my chest. I went to my hands and knees. The metal gridded floor was slick with something too old to smell. The air was flat and without change, as if no one had breathed it in centuries. The chorus knew the way. I did not. But I crawled forward as if I had memorized it. Darkness pooled in the narrow passage until I could feel it pressing my back. Ahead, the corridor bent, twisted, dropped a little. My knees began to ache from the hard grate, but the hum inside me drowned the pain. The chorus unspooled my path in small, exact measures. After the second turn I found the flooring of the kitchen creating the ceiling above me. I lifted the panel ever so gingerly, looking around in the room filled with the remnants of mayhem. In the chaos I found the first target. It glowed like a collectible item from video games in my life as Jason. A squat cylinder no bigger than my forearm. I pulled the tab and the seal broke with a dry hiss. A pale paste the color of rainwater's scum clung to the lip. The first mouthful coated my tongue in salt and ash. My jaw worked without joy, without pause. A cold text slid through my vision. Calorie intake, 840, 150,000. The number was obscene. The paste was thick. I swallowed until my stomach cramped, then licked the rim for the last grain. Calorie intake, 1,420, 150,000. Every so quietly I continued as to not alert the raiders. The second tub was larger. The same paste, older, the taste heavy with the dust of its own container. I ate until my throat worked without me. Calorie intake, 3,920, 150,000. The smell reached me then. Blood. Not the thin background smell that had seeped into every cloth, every wall, but fresh, hot, wet. The raiders had not yet noticed my absence. I could only guess they thought I was hiding from them behind the tube once held the chorus. They were bent to their work in the main chamber. Those who had stayed behind had made the kitchen their butcher's table. 2 bodies lay on the tile. Or what was left. The first bite was from the paste again, one of the tubes left on the counter. But it was slow. Too slow. The number rose in my vision like a dripping clock. Calorie intake, 4,220, 150,000. Calorie intake, 4,580, 150,000. The chorus pressed. More. I looked at the bodies. The skin pale under the strips of missing cloth. The blood cooling in the air. I remembered the taste of meat when the printer had first given us pork. The hum in my body deepened until my teeth hurt. I crawled forward. My hands shook, not from fear, not from shame. The first mouthful was wrong. Cold. Metallic. But my body knew what to do. Calorie intake, 6,040, 150,000. I chewed. Swallowed. Breathed through my nose. Calorie intake, 7,980, 150,000. Outside the kitchen the laughter and screams rose again, echoing down the corridor. They had found another game. I took another bite. Calorie intake, 9,420, 150,000. It was work. Slow work. My jaw ached. My stomach swelled. The chorus counted without pause, the numbers clicking into place like teeth closing. Calorie intake, 11,880, 150,000. I did not look at their faces. The raiders had not yet wondered where the small one had gone. If they did, They did not care. They were too busy skinning their new playthings, feeding the fire of their madness with screams and wet tearing sounds. The chorus whispered again. Calorie intake, 27,100, 150,000. The paste tubes were easier to swallow, so I alternated them between mouthfuls of flesh, the cold meat washing down with the cloying grit of the paste. My belly screamed, but the chorus overrode it, narrowing the world to the movement of my jaw in the rising number. Calorie intake, 31,440, 150,000. Calorie intake, 34,980, 150,000. The raider's noise swelled and fell like the wind. Once, a scream cut through it, higher than the others, and I knew without needing to see that someone still alive in the main chamber was not going to stay that way. My hands were slick. I licked them. Calorie intake, 36,100, 150,000. The chorus began to hum. It wasn't music, not in the human way. It was a vibration between my ribs, a pressure in my teeth, the slow tightening of a rope I hadn't noticed was around my chest. Calorie intake, 41,500, 150,000. Time began to shift sideways. The numbers were climbing faster than I could account for. My stomach burned. My head swam. Calorie intake, 49,200, 150,000. Calorie intake, 57,600, 150,000. The paste tubes dwindled. The meat cooled. I tore it from the bone and let the bones pile onto the counter. I found myself gnawing marrow, the fat slick core soft and yielding. Calorie intake, 63,000, 150,000. The hunger was a knife now. It cut me from the inside, but each cut made more space. Somewhere far off, the sound of glass being struck. A pause. Then another blow. They had found the armored wall again. Calorie intake, 75,400, 150,000. I bit through cartilage, spat gristle. My fingers cramped around a leg bone and I used it like a spoon to scoop what was left into my mouth. Calorie intake, 84,000, 150,000. The chorus's hum deepened. The light in the kitchen seemed too bright, every edge too sharp. I could see dust motes spiraling in the air with the slow grace of planets in orbit. Calorie intake, 96,200, 150,000. Calorie intake, 101,400, 150,000. I was shaking now, the crawl space behind me beckoning like the throat of some deep animal. My belly was a hot stone. My breath whistled in my ears. Calorie intake, 111,700, 150,000. The chorus whispered one word over and over. Closer. 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 The last of the paste tubes went down in 3 gulps. I licked the metal rim until my tongue rasped. Calorie intake, 122,300, 150,000. The body in front of me was no longer a person. It was a shape that contained what I needed. Calorie intake, 131,800, 150,000. Calorie intake, 144,900, 150,000. I tore one final strip of meat and swallowed without chewing. Calorie intake, 150,000, 150,000, class confluence ready. The text burned across my vision, each letter a rung on a ladder I could feel under my hands. The hum became a roar, and the world blanked. The white came back, and this time it did not scream. It waited. It was the moment before a door opens. The raider's pounding was still there, somewhere far away, but it had lost its urgency. The hunger was gone, replaced by a heat in my limbs, a weight in my hands, the sense that my body had been measured and rebuilt cell by cell. Proceed? And I did not hesitate. The white had changed. It was no longer a howl without walls. Now it had shape. Edges as tall as horizons. Pillars that were not built but grown from the light itself, the way frost grows from glass. I stood and did not stand, weight and weightlessness woven together until I could not say where one stopped and the other began. The chorus spoke without whisper or scream. It rang like struck steel in an empty cathedral. Class selection, candidates' elements. From the void, 3 colors bled upward, each forming into a tower that leaned toward me like trees in a wind. They were not things you could touch. They were ideas that had teeth. Bloomkeeper. I felt soil under my nails, damp and black. Roots curling like knuckles. The hunger of green things that drink from something richer than water. A tether to every growing thing, pulling me into their slow patient war. Luminous predator. Light became a weight on my shoulders. A mantle I could not set down. Faces turned toward me, not in love, not in hate, but in expectation. Eyes like judgment. The promise of my own voice turned to a blade. Sky burned threnodist. Ash drifted down that had never known ground. Wind passed through bone and came away singing. Smoke rose in spirals, carrying names I did not know but somehow had once spoken. Grief shaped into a weapon. Fallout tamed like a leashed animal. I didn't understand any of it. What does this mean? My voice felt child small in the vault. What's a threnodist? A singer? A soldier? A class choice conflux confirmed. Wait, what? No. No, explain something first. The white surged. The other shapes collapsed into themselves, leaving only the dark ribbon of ash and lightning coiling before me. Skyburn threnodist accepted. Stop, wait. The pain came again, but it was not the same cold water in the cracks. It was fire under the skin, fuses running through every nerve. My knees went soft. My hands locked on my skull, not to hold it together but to keep the flood from spilling out. It showed me the work of the threnodist not in words but in scars. Verses, quick cuts of sound, some to still the enemy's hands, some to mark them for the pyre, some to blind their machines. Threnodies, braided from 2 or 3 verses, blooming into winds that burn and bless alike. After winds that linger when the song ends, wearing away at the enemy while mending the resolve of those who stand beside me. Knells, earned from death, struck from the moment an enemy falters, coins to be spent on storms, on codas, on Skyburn writ down to the earth. Trait conferred, Skybrand survivor. You will never burn by the same fire twice. You are the shadow the strike leaves behind. I saw other truths layered in. I would hear danger before it came, soft ticking like a hidden clock. My songs would strip the wool from metal mines, silence their drones mid-flight. My feet could walk unharmed through embers, broken glass, thin acid, the aftermath of my own fury. I wanted to ask why me, but my mouth made no sound. Trait conferred, bone cocant. The ability to shape sound into memory. To make memory into sound. Trait conferred, Pyrrhic inheritance. Fire follows you. It will not burn you, dare to touch you again. Trait conferred, Threnodies' hand. You may guide the dying to speak one last truth. The chorus gave no mercy in its telling. Each name for a gift was a hot brand pressed into the soft clay of my mind. I felt my pulse quicken to keep pace with it. The knowledge was already in my hands, my throat, my lungs. And then, as quickly as the towers had risen, the white folded down upon itself and was gone. I was alone again in the glass room, standing with ash still on my tongue. The raiders' pounding had not stopped. They had not noticed the world's delay. But I had. What are you doing to me? No answer, only the shapes burning into me, like someone pressing heated wire into clay. Class choice finalized. Level 1 Skyburn Threnodist achieved. Welcome, symbiote. The words were not spoken so much as forced through the throat of the chorus. Bent and cracked and strained into a human cadence. They did not belong in its mouth. They had been made to fit. A piece of the chorus' unending harmony jammed into a mold too narrow and too crude to hold it. Local network. Nah. Introductory quest updated. Quest, escape, survive the raiders. Reward, variable. Network energy insufficient. Remapping reward structure. The glyphs broke apart like eggshells in my mind. I blinked them away. The white receded entirely and the room returned to me with its smells and its sounds and its 2 human horrors. The raiders were still there. The glass wall still buckled under their blows, the sharp metallic ringing traveling up my bones with each strike. I wanted to save everyone. That want was a thing that had been inside me long before this day and has never left me. I wanted it as naturally as I had wanted food or air. It was all I had. And I suppose you think I charged in there then. That I ran from the ground, streaked with my own blood and other people's viscera, and fell upon those vile men like some revenant from their own nightmares. That I laid about me with the new gifts of my class, sky-burning dirges twisting their nerves and burning their eyes in their sockets. That I became, in the moment, the justice they had earned. Well. You would be partially right. I rose from the slab. The chorus stirred behind my thoughts like water catching light. My breath was a column in my chest and every rib rung on the ladder it climbed. I could feel the verses, not as words but as postures, ways to shape my throat and tongue. The air tasted like ash. I understood without understanding that the first of my tools was cinder fall note. I had no training. But I had a frame to fit it in. I had a need and the need was enough to draw the shape of it out of me and up from the depths of my trauma as Jason. The glass broke. A raider stumbled through, his face painted with the slop of other men's blood and the fat sheen of sweat. His eyes were not the eyes of a man anymore. They were fissures in a burned log. No thought moved behind them. Only heat. He searched for me but I was no longer there. Instead I used the glass breaking to launch my move. By the time he turned around puzzled to his companions I was mid-charge. I sang. It was not a song as anyone sane might reckon it. The pitch wavered like a thread caught between the teeth. The note trembled with heat, and heat became hunger, and the hunger became a hole. The raider's smile did not fall away. It burned from his face as if the flesh had decided to evacuate. A hole opened where his cheek had been, molten at the edges, dripping and rehardening on his collar. The smell was like pork cooked too fast. I felt the chime in my skull. The silent marker of gain. Enemy slain. Nell acquired. Experience awarded. I was alive because he was dead. That was the only math the moment could hold. I might have turned that to more killing if the others had been less quick, less large, less sure of the weight of their own arms. The first blow came from my right. The arm that took it went dead at the shoulder. The second found the ribs and made them sing an octave lower. The third was the floor. There was no time to sing again. No room for it. The chorus shouted in all its thousand-voiced language but its meaning was only up. My body did not agree. Hands closed in my hair. In my collar. Pulled me across the broken glass and made a red trail behind. A knee in the gut to still the kicking. A fist in the mouth to still the biting. My teeth clicked on each other and I tasted the iron of my own gumline. Somewhere in the beating I felt the chime again. I don't know when the molten-faced raider died but his death carried its weight back to me even as another man's heel carried me into the floor. The chorus marked the level gained with no regard for the state of its instrument. The blows blurred together until they had no sequence. I was thrown. I was lifted. I was dropped. The sound of me hitting things became part of the room's music. Once a hand closed on my ankle and swung me like a length of chain into the wall and I thought, in the flicker between one heartbeat and the next, that my leg had been removed entire. But the pain came and stayed and so the leg must have stayed too. They spoke between themselves as they worked me. Not with words that had a point but with the dull amusement of men who had discovered an odd insect under a rock and wanted to see what would happen if they burned off its wings. My family's bodies lay still and my mind refused to count them. Counting was dangerous. When they tired of the game they tossed me with the rest of the surviving meat. The words they used were simple, shaped for even their heat-damaged tongues to manage. Sturdy little bastard. Won't snap, will he? One said, his breath hot and sour in my ear. Give it time. Everything snaps. Bet he squeals sweet, another said. Ain't made a sound yet worth keeping. Look at them eyes. Got the same look the dogs get when they know they're on the rope. A laugh, wet and broken, like something coughing up its own spit. Reckon we eat him last, someone else said. Last? Another snorted. We keep him. Good luck charm. A mascot. That's what I said. You don't eat your mascot. You do if it starts biting. They laughed again, and the sound was like steel dragged over a plate. Hands took turns testing me, slapping, prodding, pushing a thumb into the soft of my cheek until my jaw clicked. Someone twisted my arm until the shoulder popped. Another man jammed 2 fingers into the notch above my collarbone and pressed until my vision spotted white. He's light, one said. Feed him up, see if he fights better. Or fight him hungry. See how long before he bites one of us. Bet the little bastard's got teeth like a rat. The light around me grew red at the edges. I thought maybe the room was on fire but it was just my eyes going. My head was full of pulse and heat and a ringing that didn't match anything they were saying. I tried to count the others before the dark came all the way down. Faces, parts of faces, limbs that trembled or did not. One man with half his hair burned away. A woman whose leg bent wrong in the middle. A man with his jaw slack, eyes open but fixed on nothing. I made it to 10. 10 survivors, maybe. Or 10 parts of people worth saving. I couldn't be sure.